So it's a really positive world where the sort of community of scientists and engineers is changing things in a much more fundamental way than what is possible in today's reality.
Thank you.
I was also going to say the science. I think science is very prominent, but also questions about science. So it makes you wonder, like, can we actually do that now? Sometimes, yeah. And also makes you wonder, could this happen? Is it happening? And I will say my very niche, very specific favorite thing is in season 1, when Gordo's having a hard time on the moon, then they pretend that he has a cold. Because then I went down a very deep rabbit hole of, is it possible to have a cold after you've been isolating in space for months? And the answer is also yes.
Well, I'm an aerospace engineer, so anything space is up my alley, and I'm in. But I think my favorite part about it, other than the fact that they had great tech advisors and it's pretty technically accurate as far as a TV show goes, is like the representation of women in aviation and science. And I think that that's just, my background being a woman in aviation, like it's cool to see yourself in TV and in the fandom that you really like, and to see it represented well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll fully echo that. I mean, as another woman in STEM and in academic research, I think it's been really cool to see from how early on in the show, so many different people and perspectives were included in the science and technology. It's even today still harder to kind of have those voices in the room sometimes. So I've loved seeing that since the beginning of the show. But just as like a side note, the creative minds behind the show, their attention to detail and getting everything historically like accurate, but really just kind of hitting each of the decades that the show covers with such like perfect attention to detail. Wonderful.
Yeah, it's now my go-to answer to what show on TV do you recommend if you want to see like scientifically accurate stuff. But I think for me, what drew me to it at first was the name For All Mankind, because I was like, look, NASA doesn't even say manned spaceflight anymore. It's human spaceflight. So you better have a reason besides the quote to say mankind. And then I saw it was coming from Ron Moore, and I'm like, oh, he has an intention, because I trust him. And I've trusted him since Star Trek The Next Generation, and he hasn't let me down yet.
So I thought Pablo would say this, but I'm really interested in the human aspects and how they touch on all kinds of different social movements, but are turned a little bit. So, in the last, we're going to say spoilers, so we'll go with that. But in the last season where, we have this kind of upstairs, downstairs kind of sociology and the strike and everything like that. The fact that we could have this on Mars is it's great to see that all of spaceflight is still human spaceflight, and that we're still going to have human issues. So, yeah.
So I want to pick up on that, on the sociology, but with a lens on women in science, because we have a great representation on this panel also. So their timeline on bringing women into space and into space engineering is quicker than it was in real life. Why do you think that is?
We sometimes hate to acknowledge this, but the Russians had women cosmonauts, and we didn't have women astronauts. And I love the fact that that was actually the starting point of this show. That was the starting push.
Yeah, in the show they referenced the Mercury 13, and that wasn't really those 13 women existed, but it was a privately funded venture, and it wasn't something that NASA was supporting, and it didn't even get called the Mercury 13 until the 90s, when it was like a media push to talk about these women that were pioneers. And so I think that we just weren't there yet, and until somebody forced us to try to beat them, like you said, the Russians, like it just hadn't occurred to anyone that women would be good at this, even though Jerry Cobb, the woman that Molly Cobb is modeled after loosely, when she was tested, she was top 2% of all ASCANs, astronaut candidates, of men and women. And so women are actually very well suited for human spaceflight.
And I'll actually play off of that, because actually one of the health risks going in space is this ocular damage, and it's actually less frequent in women than men. So there's this fear that space was too dangerous for women, when this argues it's too dangerous for men.
So I don't want to say that this was a small change in the history that the show portrays, right? I mean, another country winning the space race would have been a big deal, but could something really upset a society as much as it did in the show?
Definitely. I think that the way the show captures the nuances of the Cold War is incredible, because I think that if that had happened, given the dynamics of how the Soviets were a little bit more inclusive in their sort of large scientific projects, that might have pushed the US to be more inclusive too very early on. And I think that that's a demonstration of just how much care went into thinking about what would make this alternative history credible and something that reflects actual things that happened in our reality. So yeah.
It could do that.
Yeah.
That's amazing to think about.
I mean, social change needs sometimes a little bit of a push, and in this case, the Soviets really did shove quite a bit the US into the right direction.
One of the themes, of course, is that they go to space, they build a base, they do some mining of the moon, Mars, wherever they wanted to go. And this is something that we're now looking to do, right? NASA's Artemis mission is set to put a lunar base on the moon for astronauts to live there and do more exploring and do more science. Not the mining part yet. Who knows where that's going to go? Where do we think this will go after we successfully do this mission? When will Mars be next? What do our physicists and astronomers have to say to that?
Well, I'll say this is probably more of a policy question than an astronomer's question, because we're ready to go now. But one of the aspects of the show that's interesting is that, in that alternate timeline, we've been there at this point 10, 15 years, right? So it's clear that we have the technology. If we had passed through the sort of technology and the funding for that, we can go now. I think in practical sense, we always need a reason, right? We need a push. And so it might be resource related, right? It might be that if we find resources on the moon or Mars that we need, for example, helium is a resource that's talked about, I think in season 3 or 2, mining that and using that for power sources. So if we can find those sources that we need for Earth, that might help push us to that direction.
Well, I think if you look back at the original Apollo mission timeline, they thought we would have been at, there was no envisioning of stopping. Like, they thought we were going to be at Mars, but like the 80s or 90s. But then the Vietnam War happened, and you needed money. So it's like Adam said, it's a policy issue. And so, yeah, we could be there.
From an engineering and science standpoint, though, can we mine something else? How would we get samples back? How would communication work? What would that look like?
Yeah, so samples back is an interesting question because the economics need to work. That's not my experience, but bringing rocks back is heavy. It's costly, right? So it needs to be something with value added enough. But what's interesting is the idea that you would mine to be self-supporting, right? So you would mine the moon or Mars for the resources you need for the colony there, because then the transportation problem goes away. But you definitely need the instrumentation to make sure that what you're mining really is what you need. You're not digging up some random rock. And because, again, of the cost of bringing everything back, that means you need instruments at that location to determine the mineral composition of all these samples to make sure you can analyze them right there, use them right there.
Yeah, I guess just to jump in on that, we start to see that in the expanded Jamestown base, they have a scientific lab. There's chemistry happening on the moon. And for you as somebody that works in mass spectrometry, maybe you want to let the audience know how expensive and sensitive these kinds of instruments are, and maybe some of the challenges that may be associated with setting that up in space.
Yeah, mass spectrometers are expensive. They're fussy. But they're also not huge. You can get benchtop instruments that are maybe this big. They make ones that are in use in space. So several of the exploration missions have had mass spectrometers on board. So they can be adapted for space. Basically, they need to be rugged, right? You don't want something that's super fragile for the space missions. You need something that's shielded from all those electromagnetic radiations because that wreak havoc with your data. One of our problems here that you don't have in space is the instruments need to operate under vacuum. Well, if you're doing that in space, it's a lot easier to achieve depending on where you're sampling. So that's a little bit simpler, actually.
As far as like the propulsive technology to get us there, we can do that. We've already planned, the Artemis program has planned out missions to the moon and Mars, and then kind of the limiting factor that NASA is starting to look at again that they touch on in the show is using nuclear propulsion, which is kind of like a touchy topic with different, there's all sorts of regulatory stuff around that and treaties and things. But to really feasibly do that in less time, nuclear propulsion is probably going to end up being the way that we go. But then if you think about if the extended timelines, then you have to support the human space flight and supporting people in space that, you touched on that, like we have real human problems even in space, like your health problems is then miniaturizing equipment to have a surgical suite on the International Space Station or on the moon base or on the Martian base. In the moon, like they kind of talk about this in the show too, you can kind of evacuate somebody from the moon back to Earth if you need to. If there's something really emergent, you can stabilize them and evacuate them back to Earth. But you can't do that when you're going to Mars. And so you have to miniaturize and have everything functional like a CT scanner, which there's some really cool stuff coming out of Europe right now where they're miniaturizing MRI and CT, but it's super experimental. And right now, those are entire rooms of the hospital if you ever have had one of those. And they, draw a large magnet, which would mess with all of your other equipage on whatever vessel you're on. So there's a lot of other technical challenges with the extension of the propulsive transit that you would be going through to actually reach Mars. So like all of those components interplay, and it's really kind of fascinating about all of the like waterfall cascading of things you have to think about when you're just extending the duration of your flight because of your propulsive choices.
Yeah.
And it's not only the equipment. If we're sending people on an extended mission, there are health issues that we need to consider and psychological, sociological issues that we need to consider. Where is science on the health aspect of sending men to space for a longer time? Men as in peoples, not men.
Yeah, well, I think that we still have quite a long way to go because realistically, even our technology as like biologists, biomedical researchers, we still haven't come as far as we probably could to really understand the in-depth details. I mean, technically, DNA sequencing was invented after space, like the first space flight, right? Like, we're still just really learning all of the details about biology, and we kind of know from the show and just from space travel in general, there's a lot of dangers to your body associated with traveling in space, like a lot of radiation exposure, like just being in that microgravity for an extended period of time. There are people studying that in a lot of different capacities, but we have a long way to go to really understand the impact. But consequently, the more we can understand the impacts, the more we can actually even bring some of that knowledge back to Earth and even use that towards developing maybe treatments for diseases back here as well.
Yeah, and go ahead. Sorry. One interesting idea around that is the two Kelly brothers. So twin brothers, astronauts. So then you can compare the one who's in space right now when he comes back to his brother who stayed on Earth, right? And so there were very big genetic changes. There's changes in the microorganisms on your body when you live in space, big immune changes as well going on. But, we did send people on the ISS for a year, so technically you can have people be in space for a year. But the problem is bringing them back, and how much risk are we willing to tolerate for those people also?
And also being there longer than a year, too. You talk about colonizing the moon, colonizing Mars. What happens when you're in space for 5 years, 10 years, your whole life? Like, how does that change?
I thought that was really interesting how they kind of glossed over that in the show when Kelly Baldwin had a baby in space, like out of Mars. I was like, there is so much to unpack here, like ethically and, like when you and they kind of tried to pay homage to it with like, oh, he has, developmental lung issues and some cardiovascular issues because he was in less gravity there. And then when he goes back to Mars, he now his body doesn't have to work as hard to pump blood and breathe and things. And so they kind of like touch on that, but gloss over the huge amount of research that's being done on this. There's this group at NASA it's out of Baylor Medical School, the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, where they're doing a lot of these kinds of studies and trying to take information that they've learned from space and do what you were just saying about bringing it back to Earth, bringing it back to terrestrial applications. And then there's a whole commercial spaceflight astronaut database that they've just stood up to kind of take data from all of the SpaceX and Virgin Galactic astronauts, even for their short duration, and see if that short duration affects us and if they can recover back to their baseline state. It's a lot of neat stuff that I like to geek out on.
The commercial aspect is interesting too, because that's a very different health profile than the NASA astronauts, right? Because now you have much older people, you have people who might have underlying health conditions. So what is space flight doing? And that's important if we want to talk about large-scale colonization and what that would mean.
When we talk about colonization, how many of the social structures do we take with us? In the show, I find it very interesting that pretty quickly they establish a black market trade. And they're also then from that grow into bringing family members to the base. So how many problems can we leave behind and really start new, or how many are we going to bring with us?
I think that's one of the things that the show gets really, really well. And it's the fact that when we travel, we take all the structures that were habituated in our heads with us. So it's not only structures around family dynamics, but it's also things like the sort of upstairs, downstairs dynamics of those who have resources and those who don't. It's also things like what happened in the last season, where people were playing out these roles of being the arm of the state, even though they were 200 million miles away from anyone that could punish them. So it's really interesting how when we travel, we take all the sort of good bits of our personas and the bad bits of our experiences with us, and we reproduce them wherever we go. So will it be very different? I don't know.
And from a travel perspective, we don't have to go to Mars next, right? Lisa and Adam, you look at exoplanets.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you send the show next? Should it be Mars? Should it be a different planet? What do you think?
Well, I know they're thinking 70 years for this show. I think they have to go a lot longer for exoplanets. We have to keep reminding that stars are very far away, and it's going to be many generations, even on the timescale that this show has moved forward in, before we even start to consider a possible way of doing that. But if we move past Mars, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn have a lot more water than the Earth does. One of those moons has more water than the oceans in the Earth. And so that being one of the main building blocks for life and one of the main things we need to sustain life, those are certainly really important destinations. And we have NASA missions and European missions that are off to explore those moons, are on their way right now. So that's probably, I would say, really looking down the road past Mars, those Jovian and Saturnian systems are going to be really interesting places to explore, and not just in terms of life, but also for other resources that we may not have here.
Yeah, and I think the whole thing about water. So we were talking about mining and bringing stuff back, but one of the biggest costs of a space mission is taking stuff with you. And so where the science met the science fiction so well and For All Mankind is they picked Shackleton Crater for their base, which is at the pole of the moon, really low light angle. So there's parts of that crater that have never seen sunlight, never. And so they think there could be water in the form of ice there. So that was like the perfect choice. And then they go to Korolev crater on Mars, which if you've ever seen an image of it, just has this puddle of ice in the center. And so, yeah, they're going after water. And so that's the Jovian and Saturnian moons, because we need the water. That's the most precious resource in the solar system.
Yeah, and not just for life. I mean, we also use water for propulsion, right? We combine hydrogen and oxygen to get ourselves off the Earth in the first place. So it's a major resource on many levels.
I want to come back to something that Laura said about, yes, you can get a cold even though you've been in isolation for a long time. How, and also, are we worried about pathogens that we don't even know about on Earth?
I mean, yes and yes, I think. So definitely, so there's a lot of viruses that can just live in your body forever after you've been exposed the first time. And so they just hang out. Many of you have had a cold sore. Same idea. So all those family of viruses just stay inside your body and can reactivate, reappear, multiply when your immune system goes down. And Kokila brought up less gravity. That really dampens your immune system. And so that creates a scenario where your body's not as good at defending itself. And at the same time, because of that, viruses start reemerging. So you can have, for example, RSV virus can be latent. It can hang out in your body and then reemerge. So over half of astronauts have reemergent latent viruses during space missions. So it's actually very common, not necessarily respiratory, but all kinds of viruses can come back that we carried with us. So that's the Earth viruses coming along for the ride. What you can encounter, that's definitely always a concern, right? Because if you're looking for life, what life are you going to find there? And if it's something completely new that your immune system hasn't seen, that can cause severe infections. At the same time, it needs to be able to infect us, right? There's a very, very huge number of microbes out there, and most of them are not able to enter the human body. They're not able to multiply in the human body, and so they won't cause disease. So just because there's life out there doesn't mean it's life that's out to get us. So that's at least a little reassuring.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I had also for our astronomers is, when we think about life out there, and it came up in the show too, they asked, like, what if we encounter something that is life and we weren't prepared for it? When astronomers think about life in space, other life forms in space, what do you think that might look like?
Well, one of the things I love about the show is Kelly is incredibly frustrated the whole time because she's really, that's what she's looking for is life, on Mars. And she's constantly kind of, pushed aside and, folks are drilling water without doing the proper checks. So I feel for her in this case, right? So, because certainly, if we think about the history of life on Earth, right, it wasn't too long in sort of geological time when the Earth was cool enough where life could exist, that life did exist. We have evidence of single-celled life very early on. It changed the atmosphere of this planet. And so I think astrobiologists in general would think that life is, in the sort of very simple forms, probably very common, because a lot of the ingredients that we know that are needed for life on Earth, including water, but other chemicals, are incredibly common throughout space. So, I would not be surprised, and be careful with people recording this, but I would not be surprised that, as we start to explore Mars and as we start to explore even the Saturnian and Jovian moons, there's a good chance that we will find single-celled life forms, or at least the evidence of them existing. And that's going to be common throughout the universe. Now, whether that's something that interacts with us is a whole other question. That spins into lots of science fiction fun. But certainly that's going to be very important in understanding how life really develops when we start to find these independent lines of biology.
I just agree with Adam.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, before we get to the audience questions, I have the feeling that you might also have questions for these amazing panelists. The reason why the writers who actually would have liked to join us today were not able to join us is because they started production on the next season. I hope I was allowed to say that. They didn't say I wasn't, so you're bad. If you could send a message to the writers for maybe not this season, but for the next one, because they're starting production already, what storyline would you encourage them to pick up?
Ooh.
I know we didn't discuss it in advance, so I just threw that out there. It's a big surprise. We don't have to start with you. If anybody wants to go first, go
I can
for it.
say something
Okay.
that's going to be totally controversial, but the the sort of last season and the thing that is going on in Mars reminds me a little bit about other science fiction sort of stories that involve Mars. And if there were some connections to that, I won't say which ones, but they might be The Expanse and they might be sort of the trilogy of Mars. That would be really interesting because I think that there is a common imagination about how Mars might be different that could be explored in the show. So let's see.
Okay. Okay, my disclaimer is I have not seen the last season, so if this is actually already in the show, then it's awesome and I need to binge watch it now. But we talk a lot about the health risks, but when we do, we talk about, what happens if you develop a tumor, right? What happens if you have a heart attack? Or what happens if you have space microbes? But there's a whole bunch of other health effects that are not talked about, and that's allergies. So what happens if you have an immune reaction to some of the chemicals or the molecules you encounter? That's not shown on anything I can think of, and that's actually a big concern. So you can develop lunar hay fever, for example. So that I would like to see more of that being considered.
So I'm going to cheat, and I don't have any affiliation with Apple TV whatsoever, but they are doing a spin-off called Star City about the development of the Soviet space program, and I am super excited about how they're going to do that because in my undergraduate work, one of my professors was an astronaut, Dr. Catherine Thornton, and she taught us this class called History of Spaceflight. And we had to read books from the US perspective and then books from the Soviet perspective of how the space programs developed. So I am super excited to see how that tangent of the show goes when they get to that.
I'll also put out a disclaimer that I have not watched the most recent season yet, but with what we have right now in our current lives with the development of artificial intelligence and the way that level of technology is going, we've seen in this show how technology has come so far ahead of where it has come in our reality that I'd love to see sort of how they explore the idea of maybe like artificial intelligence driven missions and how space flight and how these things look when it's not necessarily humans that are doing the thinking.
All right, well, that just made me think of I have in the back of my head that this is actually the prequel to the Battlestar Galactica universe. so you may have just come up with this leading into the Cylons.
Oh, time to go into writing and stuff.
Yeah, no, but I think they're doing, the goal probably would be asteroids next, but I'm trying to think of where they'd go in the 6th season, in the 7th season, so I'm still saying Battlestar Galactica prequel.
Well, I would tell the writers to give Lainey a consulting job for Spin City because she knows a lot about it, so that's great. One of the things I really love that they do is they keep the broader culture kind of similar decade by decade, even though we have this major change in this one kind of thread. So, the next season being possibly in the mid-2010s, we have a rise of social media and very, dirty politics, and I'm just hoping that Trump doesn't show up in this next one. Please don't do that, writers. Please don't do that.
Thank you all for that. And thanks to the writers for putting on a fantastic show that we've enjoyed so much. Such a good show. Yes, so now we come to the audience questions. There's a microphone in the middle aisle. So just line up and then go for it. And since we see a couple of people lining up, if you could keep your questions concise and really lean into the microphone.
Not a problem. Oh, I may not have to lean it too far. First off, I want to say I am so amazed and gratified to see the number of women on this panel. Gives me hope that maybe we're catching up to where it shows we should be in the show. Anyway, there were a couple of questions. I'll just ask them. In terms of mining and bringing things back, one of the problems is, of course, gravity. How about space elevators? Where are we in terms of that technology, and is that a possibility as a way of solving that problem? So that's one question. The other one is, one of my favorite books growing up was Robert Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. And he really explores what happens physiologically to humans who are born, grow up, and live exclusively on the moon. They basically almost become another species. How possible or accurate is that?
Well, I'll jump in on the space elevator. I mean, the key innovation that has to happen for that is material science, right? We need to have an incredibly strong but a very lightweight something that we can hang for 200 kilometers, something like that. I don't remember what the exact, it's one of my physics problems, but I think it's actually radius of the Earth. So we had something that's, 6,000 kilometers long that is lightweight enough that we can actually manufacture. We are not anywhere near that yet. I would say, just for that first question, and we see this in other science fiction films, is that, why do we need to bring it down to Earth? Can we just do all our manufacturing up in orbit or on the moon on Mars? And I think that's probably the more economic and physical way to do it.
I would agree with that. It's definitely a material science challenge, and also the regulatory and political challenge of that. Where would you put it? How do you, who mandates what airplanes or drones can stay away from that? You can definitely tell that's what I do for a living. Because that was the first place I went, was like, who controls that?
Yeah.
And and there's been a whole lot of research about manufacturing in space. There's a pharmaceutical company that is showing better results for some HIV medications that are being made in zero gravity, because they have better crystallization of the chemical properties. And so there's all sorts of cool potential that points to that might be a better solution, at least in the near term.
Yeah. Okay. And to answer sort of the second question that you had, I would say yes. Honestly, it's a question that I've had too while watching this show. As Laura Isabel mentioned, when we're in a different gravitational environment, when we have different chemicals and molecules that we're kind of adjusting to, potentially different life, maybe. Yeah. Our bodies are going to react very differently. I mean, we know like increased radiation exposure can increase our risk for cancer. That's really because this radiation's coming in, it's changing our DNA, and in the sense that it's kind of damaging our DNA, and it's really changing fundamentally how our bodies just exist. And so I think this potentially getting to a whole different species is a different level of philosophical question that we can chat about later. But I would say that, if, what is the next 1,000 years of colonization in space going to look like to the human population? I would bet that they're going to develop over time a lot of different adaptations to living in an environment that is so wholly different from Earth.
Good questions.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
My question is specifically for Dr. Shankar and Dr. McCall. I also work in a biomedical pharmaceutical field. I'm sort of on an island as the only science fiction spec-fic space fan in my industry. How do I convince other people in biomedical fields that they need to be watching shows like For All Mankind and Star Trek and other things?
Because they're good. Because it's fun. I mean, there's
Good storytelling. It's all about good.
I mean, that being said, I will say, I think as a microbiologist, there's so much physics and engineering in all these shows, and biology kind of takes a seat back often, which makes me a little sad. But I think, because we get all the zombie apocalypse stuff, which is awesome, but hopefully not our future. But I think if you watch it and you start, for me it's about, wait a minute, is that possible? Can that happen? There's a lot of biological questions in that you can start geeking out with people at work about, I think. Maybe that's the incentive.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I mean, we're, as scientists, we all know that inspiration can come from the most unlikely of places. And you're watching shows like this, it's hard to not have questions in the field of how this may impact you, how this may relate to things you see in your day-to-day world. The fact that there's HIV treatments that may work better with zero gravity development, that's something that can easily translate to the pharma biotech industry. And so I think, again, convince them to watch it just because it's great television. But realistically, if you want to get some science out of it, I would say there's no reason you won't get a lot of science out of these kinds of shows.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hi, guys. Thank you everyone for being here. It was very, very cool to listen to everybody talk about the actual science from somebody who is not a science human. With that being said, there's been a huge rise in speculative fic and science-based science fiction in the last couple of years with The Martian, Project Hail Mary. Like, what other science-based shows, media, games do you guys recommend when we're talking about shows like For All Mankind, or my favorite is the Bobiverse books, like that kind of thing? What do you guys recommend to other people?
The Expanse.
Yes, the experience.
That too, yeah.
And many more shows.
So
I like Myra Grant's books. She has some with the idea of symbionts that develop a mind of their own. So interventions that start intervening in less desirable ways. So I like that.
I'm a huge Star Trek fan, so I will always recommend Star Trek.
Yeah.
And from the social perspective, if you've like to read Martha Wells's Murderbot series, is fantastic and very like interesting about the interface of humans and tech and droids and tech and then their take on humanity, which is kind of fascinating if you're interested in that kind of stuff. I don't know, what else does everybody else like?
I would go right back to Octavia Butler. Parable of Sower starts 6 days ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. That's wild. Yeah. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Well, given my attire, my line of questioning will kind of make sense, but I do like to think about this side of humanity. What, and the show did almost come to this point, what does a war in space look like?
Since I work for the DoD, I don't want to answer that question tonight, too.
we might find out in a couple. No, we won't. So I think that a war in space would. I mean, it's very well captured in the show because it's more difficult to do the kinds of things that we do, of course, on land. But a war in space would probably be very push-buttony. So it wouldn't be something to necessarily write home about in the same way as other wars. Not that you want to write home about wars, but yeah.
Do you think wars in... Oh, sorry.
Nope.
I was just going to say,
go
do you
ahead.
think wars in space would take longer if they have to send people to wherever the wars are happening? Do you think we're going to get like a lot of sort of Cold War type situations and like interims?
So that would be interesting because the thing is you would need to start locating weapons in close to where they are. So that happened on Earth, of course. We had weapons in Europe so that we could target the Soviets faster than what was required. So I think it would lead to an arms race locally, and then you would have these questions of when decisions are taken, how they're taken, et cetera, because if there's, for instance, an 8-minute delay between Earth and Mars, who takes the decision of when you press the button, how, and so forth, becomes a little bit more complicated.
I'll just throw out there, think about all of the things you're dependent on that cell phone in your pocket for, and you know, most of those signals are satellite based. And so that's the first layer of space. And then I think it would be a different day.
I'm going to stick the microphone for Shai's first. So I'd love to talk more about the sociological elements of the show, because obviously on the show, the new shape, the space race propels, gender equality, racial equality, that's like we self progress. We also see the need to analyze things that actually happen. It's got to be opposite bias and on arts. I'm curious, what do you all think about how accurate the show's philosophy of this relationship between space and ideology, it's how it's seen in Harvard?
So I think it's really accurate, and one of the big distinguishing features of that universe and ours is that the state is much more central in the world than what it is today. So after the 1980s, with the demise of big science and structural transformations to how science was funded, so basically funding for science has been flat over the last 30 years from the federal government. It's mostly coming from the private sector. That centrality of the state really would change the dynamics in the ways that are described in the show. So for instance, the internet isn't something that happened in the same way as it did in our world. I'm not sure that there would be social media in that world because you have video calls, and that sort of makes up for some of the characteristics of social media. There's still a really strong press. People read newspapers, and newspapers are important for communicating information, et cetera, et cetera. So I think they do capture this very critical sort of distinction between that universe where the state remains central to coordinating a lot of things in society and what's happening in our world, where the state is, of course, still important. We pay taxes and so forth, but not in the same way with respect to, for instance, innovation. So that's one big thing. Mm-hmm.
Hello. My question is for Laura. As someone who majors in biochemistry and is a student researcher in mitochondria in the human body, do viruses replicate at a faster rate in space than on Earth as the atmosphere and environment is different?
You know, I don't know about virus replication rates, but what I do know is that bacteria tend to evolve for greater virulence, greater pathogenicity. So for those of you who are not microbiology geeks like me, that just makes them nastier, meaner, more damaging, more aggressive. So that tends to evolve. Now, replication rates, I don't know. But there's also a lot of mitochondrial damage that might interest you. So a lot of oxygen-related molecules that can cause breakdown of proteins, DNA get produced. That's one of the health hazards of space. So that would change the environment for the virus as well.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, if your cells have trouble producing some of the proteins that maintain homeostasis, maintain immune function, who's to say that it wouldn't make it easier for viruses to sort of find host cells in your body to infect and replicate? Because internally, some of the mechanics might still be the same, like the production of like the viral machinery in your cells. But I would bet that if our immune systems are a little compromised in space already, there's a better chance of infection that's a little more severe.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, no pressure, but I got the sign that you have the last question for today. I'm sorry for everybody else, but I'm pretty sure you might be able to grab the sign just outside of the room after the end.
Okay, this is, first of all, hello everybody, and so forth, and probably this is directed towards Lisa and all of you. First of all mankind, is this a series? I haven't heard of it. Pardon my ignorance.
No.
And where, what streaming is it on?
It is on Apple TV. And
No
yes,
wonder. I don't have Apple, darn it.
you need to get a subscription. It's so good.
Okay. Also, I would just want to make a statement about The Expanse and so forth. It's a wonderful series, and I wish they would finish the rest of the books, so forth. Mm-hmm. And two down-to-earth questions is, number one, Mars, water on Mars. Is it a possibility that water is like dry ice water? And that's one question. And the other question is, whatever happened to the 2001 type space station, the rotating wheel that can create artificial gravity, and we can also use those for spaceships as well? What happened to that idea?
Good question. All right. Right. I'll do a planetarium show about Pearl and concrete. Anyway, so the water on Mars, we've seen water in the form of ice, in both the ice caps, in the clouds, in the dirt itself. And one of the things that the show captured really well and was done by an artist, Monkey Minion Press, down on the floor actually, was showing there is actually good radar data showing that there is underground sort of aquifers, and that was actually represented in this show. And so, yeah, water could be in the liquid form very close to the surface of Mars.
Is it,
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
is it dry ice type water or just?
No. Yep.
I mean, dry ice is there, but that's carbon dioxide.
Oh,
Yeah, the ice caps are actually combinations of CO2 ice, dry ice, and water ice. So, yeah, they're kind of cool. They're seasonal, so they can expand and contract through the suits.
whatever happened to the rotating space station?
So that's not an out of the question kind of idea. I forget, was it season 2 or 3 that they did the space hotel? Whatever season that was. It was 2? Thank you. Yeah. So they have a space hotel that's in that rotational shape that you see to try to have artificial gravity. And the first thing I said when I saw that was, ooh, that's cool, but that's not big enough, because that has to be huge to get to stimulate gravity on Earth. And then you listen to the podcast again. I don't work for Apple TV. I just really like the show. The first thing they say when they're talking to their science advisor is that we know that this isn't big enough, but we still wanted to get this concept across. So I appreciated that they know what they did and they made an artistic choice. But it's cool and it will work in theory. We've never built something that big. We'd have to, like we've talked about a couple of times, get all of that stuff up into space and then assemble it and build it and rotate it and propel it and do all of those things. And it's just a very big technical challenge.
And I'm sorry I don't have Apple Streaming. Maybe I can purchase it on Blu-ray.
Thank you so much, first of all, to you for coming today, for loving science as much as we do. And if you haven't found love for science, I hope this helped you find it. Thank you to our amazing panelists today.
And thank you, Andrea. And thanks to the Fleet Science Center. If you have the opportunity, go check it out.
Yes.
So we're going to have the scientists outside for a little bit if you have another question. I think they might be amenable to answering some of those.
Yes.